to another episode of Spart Talk. Today we have a special episode, a bit of a departure from our usual format, in that we have a special guest with whom we will be having a comradely debate, back and forth, whatever you want to call it. And that debate will be on our respective understandings of what's going on in the world. So our special guest today is Mikhail Pröbsting of the RCIT. Welcome, Mikhail. I'd like to ask you to start by telling our listeners about your organization first, if that's okay.
Hi, comrades. My name is Mikhail Pröbsting. I'm the International Secretary of the Revolutionary Communist International Tendency. We are a Trotskyist organization which has sections and activists in 13 countries, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Britain, France, Austria, Nigeria, Israel occupied Palestine, South Korea, Ukraine, Russia, Sri Lanka, Pakistan. And we our programmatic basis is the Revolutionary Communist Manifesto, which we elaborated in 2012, and at later congresses we produced updated manifestos which try to analyze the world situation as it is and elaborate a program of action as a perspective for revolutionaries. Our goal is to unite revolutionaries on the basis of agreement about the crucial tasks for revolutionaries today to advance the struggle of the working class for liberation and socialism.
Thanks for that. I think we can say that that's also our goal. The left desperately needs a principled basis for unity, which is why I think this discussion is really important. And again, thank you for agreeing to be a part of it. So our topic today is quite broad. It's about the international situation, what's really going on in the world, and how do we understand it. This is really a key question, but also one where there's not much agreement on the left, as well as between us, as we will shortly find out. So to give our listeners a sense of that, just to start off, according to a recent declaration that the RCIT wrote, it was for the meeting of the internationalist forces in Paris. He wrote, quote, that it is impossible to understand the dynamic of the world situation without recognizing the emergence of new imperialist states, in particular China and Russia. Quote. We, on the other hand, wrote that the world situation is not defined by inter-imperialist rivalries, but rather remains defined by the erratic and aggressive attempts by the US to maintain its global empire. Quote. So, already two very different understandings. I'm just going to open the floor and let's get right into it. Whoever wants to start.
I can start, maybe. All right. Hello, comrades. I would like to thank Mikhail again to come on this podcast. I think it's very important that in the left, we be able to have clarifying debates about really fundamental questions. Debates that are posed really in political terms and where we're not just throwing invective at each other, but really seeking to clarify the key political questions. So before kind of getting into the more of the theoretical side of the question, I want to highlight a little bit what's the purpose of this debate and what's the purpose of really being clear on the international situation. According to us, this is really one of the most important tasks of communists is to situate ourselves correctly in the world situation, to be able to draw the correct political tasks. And I think if we just take a little step back and we look at what's happening in the world concretely, especially over the last year or last 2 years, it's quite clear that in all the main hotspots of global conflict, one of the central tasks is the fight against U.S. imperialism. So whether we're looking at Iran, the genocide in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, or even what's going on in Latin America, fighting U.S. imperialism is really a central task. And it's simply not the same thing in terms when we look at China's role that it's playing in the world. I'll talk a bit about the case of Russia later, but I think I'd like to start by posing the question kind of concretely like this. Now, to get more into more of the theoretical side of it, for us, it's really important to understand the world's system in its actual development, to see how it actually evolved, and not simply looking at kind of just general kind of Marxist categories that are divorced from the historical development. So for us, we really start with the end of the Second World War, where the US really emerged as the hegemonic power of the capitalist world. It was able to build an alliance with the other main imperialist powers and have really a dominant position in the capitalist system. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, this dominant position was reinforced, and we didn't see a splintering up of the imperialist alliance, but its extension around the world. So if we look at the situation today, it's clear that this system is under extreme pressure. And, there has been a gigantic rise of China. Russia is certainly a formidable opponent of the United States. But this empire that was set up, all its institutions, all its key mechanisms have not been broken. The world system still functions along the same basic rules that it has since the end of the Second World War. And the main power guaranteeing this world system is still the United States. And so for us, there are certain political implications that come from this. And the main one being that is to recognize really the central reactionary role played by the United States. We really see the world situation right now as the United States really being ready to spread absolute chaos and misery around the world to maintain its empire. Now, if we look at China, as the listeners of this podcast will know, we think that China is a deformed worker state. Now, I won't right now go into all the theoretical sides of it and kind of more concentrate on the question of, is China imperialist? And so I just want to be clear, like, we don't think that China's policy around the world, its foreign policy or its trade relations are done in the name of proletarian internationalism. Far from it. It's all, Chinese nationalism and, often very oppressive. But at the same time, China just simply doesn't play the same kind of role in the world as the United States. There's if you look outside of China's borders, there's no place where really the fight against so-called Chinese imperialism is really central to the dynamics of revolutionary struggle. So I think it's just, you can't really put on the same plane a global empire that has bases all around the world and a former colonial oppressed countries, which basically its main foreign policy is geared actually at defending itself against external aggression. And I'll just finish briefly on the question of Russia. In our view, there's no doubt that the war that Russia is waging in Ukraine is not a progressive war. We do not support Russia in this war. But at the same time, we think that to properly understand this war, we have to really look at the whole development of the last 30 years in Eastern Europe. And here what we see is that the main force, the main movement is of NATO and its ally, the US and its allies in NATO expanding towards the east, right to Russia's borders. So it's not really this kind of rising Russian imperialist power that's really behind these events. I'll just leave it at this for now, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of a chance to have a back and forth on these points.
Right. Comrades, first, I want to thank you for inviting me to this discussion, to this debate. We definitely agree that this is one of the most important debates amongst Marxists today. We did already in the past 15 years, we published a number of books and pamphlets which did deal with these such issues like imperialism theory, allies of China, etc. In this debate, obviously, we have to limit ourselves to some points. And in this brief introduction, I just want to summarize our approach on this question in form of 5 theses. First, for Marxists, it is crucial to have a clear theoretical understanding, definition of imperialism. For us, as Lenin did explain, for us, the essence of imperialism is not aggressive foreign policy or other political issues, but the essence is, as Lenin did say, the domination of monopolies or monopolism. And in his well-known definition of imperialism, he elaborated 5 criteria which are characteristic for the global imperialist system. the concentration of production and capital in form of monopolies, the fusion of bank and industrial capital to become finance capital, capital export, and the economic as well as the political division of the world. Of course, since the time of Lenin, various imperialism itself has also developed and evolved. And for example, colonies play no relevant role today. Most of the world have become semi-colonies. But basically, we think this is a sound definition of imperialism, which Marxists should keep up. Second, the second thesis, throughout its whole history, capitalism and also imperialism has not been a uniform system. Has not been a system where all powers did develop in a uniform way, but where different capitalist powers, imperialist powers had different forms, and they develop in different ways. Already the colonial empires in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, they were not identical. They were different. The Spanish and Portuguese empire directed towards plundering Latin America for gold and silver. You had the British Empire, which to an important degree had first a strongly commercial character with a private, the East India Company plundering the Indian subcontinent. Later, this became more stratified. You had other empires or other powers, like Germany, which hardly had any colonies, or Russia, which had a very backward character, etc., etc. So the powers which played an important role within the capitalist system, within the imperialist system, had different features. They did not have a uniform character. The third thesis I would like to make here is that the United States became the absolute hegemon within the capitalist system after the Second World War and with the onset of the Cold War. And after the collapse of the USSR, this absolute hegemony became, even in a political way, a global feature. But at the same time, the economic power of the US did already decline since the 1970s. But today, since 2001, and more importantly, since the Great Recession in 2008, the US is no longer the absolute hegemon. The absolute hegemony of the US has ended. New powers have emerged, China in particular, also Russia, and old alliances old Western alliances have been shattered, are about to come to an end. The fourth thesis is that China has become capitalist in the 1990s, and in the 2010s, it even has become an imperialist power. And today it is the biggest rival of the US. I think it's pretty clear. Today, China has become the largest producer of capitalist surplus value. It's the largest industrial producer. It is, besides the US, the country with the largest numbers of capitalist corporations, of billionaires, etc., etc. And the last point in this brief introduction I would like to make, as a consequence of this, and that's the fifth thesis, Marxists have to take the program which Lenin the Bolsheviks elaborated in World War I, the program of revolutionary defeatism. They have to take such an approach, not only against US imperialism, but also against all other imperialist powers, including China and Russia. That's a very brief overview of our approach on this question, and I'm sure in the next 50 minutes or so we will have a lot of discussion about these issues.
Yes. Okay, well, so both of you have laid out your broad general takes. I think there's just tons of differences, and this discussion can go in many different directions, but I guess I will just turn the floor to you to respond, Perrault.
Yeah. Well, okay, let me try to start with some common ground.
Okay.
We do agree in terms like when we look, if we read I'm sure we can all agree with Lenin's book on the imperialism, highest stage of capitalism. And in our view, we certainly agree that imperialism is first and foremost a world system, which is indeed defined by the domination of finance capital and, the trusts, the 5 points that Lenin lays out. So I'm sure we can agree on this. I think it's really with the interpretation and purpose of Lenin's polemic, however, that we have a difference, because we often get this response to our points. Lenin is arguing against Kautsky that imperialism is not a policy but a system. And of course, Kautsky at the time was trying to argue that if only you get rid of militarism, then you can have kind of a peaceful imperialism. But I think today what's happening is that this whole thing is being inversed. Lenin's whole purpose of his polemic is to explain that imperialism cannot and can never be pacifist. That it inherently pushes towards a war and national oppression. And for us, that's what's kind of striking, is that, this theory that, that Lenin developed is being used to basically present imperialism as though it can function without violence, without force. That you have empires. When we're talking about imperialism, we're talking about empires that do not, nationally oppress other countries through exertion of force. So I'll leave it for this at this and let you respond to that point.
Yeah, go for it.
Yes. Look, indeed, this is one of the crucial issues. It's difficult to discuss about imperialism today if one does not have a clarity about what makes imperialism. We have a clear definition, and the point is, look, of course, imperialism cannot be pacifist, cannot exist without violence. Obviously, this is the case. First, I think you have a too narrow definition of pacifism or militarism. China definitely is not a pacifist power. It has a very powerful military. It has the second largest navy in the world. It is the third largest power in terms of arms expenditures, and it has the third largest arsenal of nuclear weapons. It is definitely a militarist power. What is true is that it has been not engaged in war since 1979, since it invaded Vietnam at the time. But this is obviously a situation which cannot last forever. But the point is, usually powers don't wage wars if they do not feel obliged or forced to do so. China in the past 10, 20 years did not find it necessary to wage a war, because they could expand their economic and political power without war. Because they were able, the point is, globalization has been a specific form of imperialism, which when it emerged in the 1980s, 1990s, it was, advanced or pushed forward, driven forward by the US. But at some point, because of the economic decline of the US has not been able any longer to remain the driver, the dominating force of globalization. And instead, China has played a more and more important role. Today, China is the largest trading power for the majority of countries in the world. Today, China is one of the largest exporters of capital. And as a result of this, they have a huge share of capitalist surplus value and profits. Why should they easily wage war if they can profit so much from the present system? The point is, because of the decline of the US, because globalization does no longer serve the interests of the US monopolies, or dominating faction of the US monopolies. Because of this, it is the US which is now attacking free trade. It is the US which is driving forward protectionism. And it is China which is defending free trade because free trade serves the Chinese monopolies. Free trade serves the Chinese monopolies to dominate or to expand their influence in the European market, in the markets of other parts of the world.
I don't actually disagree with much of the facts that you just laid out. But I want to start. I'll go a little bit more later over the question of globalization and China's role. But first, I want to go back to the question of imperialism. And I think there's really a problem in the method, because I think what your view of imperialism presents is really kind of taking out of imperialism. It's actually its most essential character, the characteristic of imperialism that remains through, whether we're talking about pre-capitalist, early capitalist imperialism, or imperialist imperialism. The constant with imperialism is the question of national oppression, and that's really central, because the reason why, for example, Lenin came up with policies like revolutionary defeatism in the First World War is because these were empires that were fighting against each other, and they were fighting to oppress other people, and so siding with one side would mean defending its exploitation of its own people. For example, siding with the British would mean defending the right of the British bourgeoisie to exploit the Indian masses. Siding with the German imperialists would mean siding with the German bourgeoisie's oppression of Namibia and so on. And that's the key characteristic that's missing when we're looking at China: national oppression. In which country, is the fight against Chinese national oppression really one of the central tasks of the revolution? In the same way that, for example, fighting British imperialism was central to the revolution in India, or how fighting US imperialism is central to the fight in all of Latin America, or the Middle East, really, or honestly, Asia. So I think that's really this most essential characteristic of imperialism that's kind of being washed away in the name of, in the future, China wants to oppress other countries. I'll leave it at that. Maybe we can go to the other question again later.
Yes. Look, I think I see the following problems with your argument. First, we can discuss what is the essence of imperialism. I think Lenin's argument that monopolism is the essence of imperialism still seems correct to me. But leaving aside this, I definitely agree that national oppression is also a very important feature of imperialism. But you must not have a too narrow definition of what is national oppression, because, and that's an important difference to the times of Lenin and Trotsky. At that time, large parts, not the whole world, but large parts of the world were colonies. So it was a direct form of national oppression. There were also important countries already at that time which were not colonies but semi-colonies, China and Latin America, etc., Persia. But the point is, national oppression does not exist only in this direct form of colonial power, but there is imperialism also oppresses countries. And in that form, they are national oppression, which are semi-colonies. It's an indirect form of oppression. And in fact, most countries in the world which suffer from the choke of US imperialism do not suffer from direct colonial oppression by the US, but indirect, as semi-colonies, financial dependence, etc., etc. Now, I'm sure we agree on this, but the point is, China also has developed, because it has become one of the largest exporters of capital, one of the largest lenders of loans, etc., also has become an important, very influential power in Africa, also even in Latin America, in Southeast East Asia, etc., etc. And in that sense, of course, there is also it also is an oppressor of people living in these countries, in addition to the fact that China, of course, also is a national, very direct and colonial national oppressor in provinces like Xinjiang and Tibet.
Well, on that last point, I agree. Obviously, we oppose the national oppression of the peoples within China's borders. But of course, China's role, as I said, we're not saying that it plays a progressive role or doesn't, do things that are oppressive to other people. But I think the key thing to look at is that there's and you're right when you say that the world does not function through traditional colonial powers anymore. But if you look at the mechanisms through which countries are oppressed today, the whole debt system, the whole system of capital flow and so on, this is really a system that has been set up by the United States and that is maintained through force by the United States. The United States is the main guarantor of this system. And China, to the extent that it does participate into these kind of exploitative relationships, it does mainly through the American system itself. For example, China lends to other countries in the US dollar. It really uses the American system itself to advance its own interest. So, but I think something that a lot of leftists forget is like they look at the world system in the last 30 years, and you don't see these big inter-imperialist wars. And so it gives the impression that the system of finance, capital, and so on basically worked without a foundation of violence. But this foundation of violence that existed is really the U.S. Army. That's really the force which basically guaranteed this system and still guarantees this system. Although you're right to point out that it's very much weakened right now.
Do you not see the contradiction that if this is the current system serves primarily U.S. imperialism and U.S. imperialism guarantees this system through force, how do you explain that it has been China which has been in the last decades the main benefiter of this system, is increased enormously? Its economic power, its monopolies have become richer and richer. So why is the US so selfless and ensures such a system which helps the Chinese, their most important rival?
Well, I think
that's a good question.
I think you're right to point this out, and I think that's exactly why it's the U.S. that's tearing up its own system, because it's seeing that it's been benefiting the Chinese. But I think the main, and this is a bit of another question in terms of the class character of China, but I think the main reason it was able to develop in this kind of way, in a way that's totally incomparable to any other country, is because of its of the class nature of the state, and its foundations are quite different from any other capitalist country. So that's how I would answer this. But I think we agree that the U.S. is the force kind of tearing the status quo apart. But I think where we disagree is that like the current central tasks for us is still, for the proletarians all around the world, is to fight against the main power, which is guaranteeing this global system to this day. And I think a mistake you make in the RCIT is to kind of go from, you observe that the American system is under pressure and in very sharp decline, and that it's already collapsed as a system. But I think those are two different things.
Yeah. If I can just pick up on that, look, I don't know where you want to, like, I love the back and forth, but I think what you just said makes me think about the question of Europe and the Western alliances. I know in the recent statement that you published, Mikhail, you assert that the alliances of, I don't know exactly the terminology, but that they've broken already. Am I correct? Or maybe the question of like what is happening to the post-Soviet sort of setup, the transatlantic alliance, etc. Everything is under strain. I think that everybody can recognize. But then the differences emerge around the assessment of where is this going? Has this ruptured already? Where is Europe going, etc. I'm wondering if that's one direction we can take this. We've talked about China a fair bit. Maybe we can talk about the other elements, but I don't know.
I definitely want to discuss about the class character of China, because I think that
we can do that.
Economic. No. I just want to make sure, make sure that at a later point we pick up the discussion at this point, because I think it's a very crucial discussion. But coming back to your question, I have not in mind now every formulation we ever used, but no, I would not say that the Western alliances are already finished, have already broken, but they are under enormous strain. And there is increasing recognition, at least amongst important sectors of the ruling political elite in Europe, Eastern Europe, that they must plan for a future without the US being their reliable ally. And they have started already steps in this direction. And it's very clear that and the US at the same time is no longer willing, no longer capable of guaranteeing, dedicating their resources to a large degree, as they did in the past, to secure or keep the security of European imperialism. So I think this is a process which is underway. Allow me just to in reply or in reaction to what Gabriel just did say before. I certainly do not doubt that the struggle against American imperialism is a key feature in the current world situation, and it is one of the most important tasks for revolutionaries. And as you yourself, of course, we definitely do not underestimate this, and we have been very active in the pro-Palestine solidarity movement, and I have been on trial and been got a 6 months suspended prison sentence because of our support for the armed resistance in Palestine. And other comrades also are facing this. But we do not limit ourselves only to the struggle against American imperialism. And for example, of our comrades in Russia or in Ukraine, the struggle against Russian imperialism is also a crucial task. And there we have a comrade, Felix Eliseev, who has been sentenced to 14 years in prison because of his support for the Ukraine and for the resistance of the Ukraine. So I just want to emphasize that just because unfortunately, one can say large sectors of the Trotskyist movement are located in Western imperialist countries. They must not be focused only or too narrowly only on their own enemy, but also take a global point of view and recognize that there are also other imperialist powers in the world, and revolutionaries in other countries also have to fight against other great powers.
There's a lot in what you just said. First of all, I think one thing, just want to highlight that one thing we very much respect with the RCIT is your very strong stance on Palestine, including your own personal courage facing these charges by the bourgeois state. I just want to highlight this point. But I want to insist a bit on the question of China and pose my question again. What countries is really the struggle against China's national oppression really kind of play a central role in revolutionary struggle? We can talk maybe about the Ukraine war different, because I think it's its own case and where we have I think some of our most important differences. But I think it's just to us, it really makes absolutely no sense to compare the fight against U.S. imperialism. If you look at Latin America, what's happening right now in Bolivia, right? It's directly the United States that are helping this reactionary government that's attacking the people of Bolivia. It's same thing in Argentina and throughout Latin America. The forces of reaction are directly leaning on U.S. imperialism. And same thing in the Middle East, to be honest. So for us, in these contexts, it doesn't make any sense when we put the question concretely in terms of the tasks posed in these various countries. Fighting Chinese imperialism simply isn't. I'm not saying that in some countries fighting a Chinese boss or something, or a particular measure, a reactionary measure by the Chinese government or Chinese capitalist companies don't play an important role, but not really the fight against national oppression in the same kind of way as it's posed with the United States.
Look, first, do not. I remember very well, I think it was in 2017 or so. We were in Zambia meeting comrades there, etc., and had a lot of discussions. Comrades did show us around and did point out the strong role of Chinese monopolies, Chinese corporations there, and how they were polluting the environment, the quality of the drinking water was terrible, etc., etc. And of course, this was 10 years ago. Today, the role of Chinese corporations in Africa certainly has increased. If you are in the fisherman in the Philippines or in Vietnam, obviously you are also faced with China. And do not forget, until 1.5 years ago, Russian imperialism was also a very important opponent in Syria for the Syrian people. And still today, by the way, Russia has military bases in Syria. And yes, you did already point out to the Ukraine, but also in Caucasus and Central Asia, Russia plays and has military bases, plays an important role. So we should not reduce this to see only the US. But look, I think it is easy to agree, hopefully, that wherever there is a concrete struggle or a concrete aggression and opposition to this, by this or that imperialist power, revolutionaries have the task, the duty to side with the oppressed people and to resist the imperialist aggression. In Cuba, if the US is now blockading it, well, we have to oppose this and support efforts to break this blockade. If now the US is, as it seems, actually succeeding in how do you say, turning around the loyalty of the Chavista regime and Delcy Rodriguez now serving the US. Of course, the US is in such a situation the main enemy and has to be fought. And it's the same in Iran, etc., etc. But in these countries which are suffering from aggression by Russia or by China, we also have to support resistance against such aggression. And just to close on this, of course, one always has to analyze concretely because we're living in a world which is, we disagree on this, but still I want to state it, is characterized by inter-imperialist rivalry, not only by inter-imperialist rivalry, but also by inter-imperialist rivalry. Because of this, it takes place, it can take place, it takes place to a certain degree that national conflicts between states are combined, exist in combination to a certain with the rivalry between great powers. This is the case even in, for example, if you look at the civil war in Sudan or in the whole Eastern Africa, the conflicts, of course, it is also brings an influence the fact that countries like the United Arab Emirates, also Russia, also Western powers have influenced their finance this or that side, etc., etc. So one has always to analyze concretely how much does a national conflict, to which degree is it combined, related with inter-imperialist rivalry. Today, if a war would start on Taiwan, it would most likely, in a current situation, immediately result in an inter-imperialist conflict between the US and China. So we think there exists a national question of Taiwan, and in its revolutionary times, in the 20s and 30s, the Chinese communists did defend the right of national self-determination for the people in Taiwan. But of course, if it is related with a conflict between the two great powers, this national element becomes a subordinated element, similar to Serbia within in World War I.
Yeah, maybe just start with the first points you mentioned. Yeah, as I said, we're very much aware that there's Chinese companies that oppress workers around the world, including, for example, Chinese state companies. So one example that I think is fairly well known is the port of Piraeus in Greece, where Costco, a Chinese state-run company, I believe, basically has very anti-union practices there. And really oppressing the working class there. Now, of course, for the workers there, fighting against this Chinese state monopoly is a central task. But if we look at Greece as a whole, it's very clear that Greece is subordinate to European and American capitalism, and not to Chinese imperialism. And I think if we look at the various countries more concretely, I think you'll see the same kind of dynamic, where you'll see the reactionary role of certain individual companies, or by controlled by China, but that the country as a whole is really first and foremost under the boot of American finance capital. Now, I think Taiwan. We can talk maybe a bit about it later when we talk about some more about China and its class nature. But maybe since we're kind of going around the point, let's go maybe into Russia and Ukraine, because I think that's really one of our main differences. Now, for us, I think we both agree that there. I think you presented as there's two dynamics. There's a national dynamic to this conflict, and there's an inter-imperialist dynamic to the conflict. Okay, we would not call it inter-imperialist, but we also think that the war concretely is being fought over who will control Ukraine. Should be in the Russian sphere of influence or in the American sphere of influence. And we think that there's no progressive side in that conflict. We want Ukrainians to be able to determine their own future with independent of either power. But when it comes to the national dynamic, I think here's where our most important difference is, because we see two sides to this national conflict. For us, if you look at the result of 2014, the Euromaidan movement and coup that happened in that period, the concrete result of this was policies by the Ukrainian government which were oppressing the Russian minorities in Ukraine. And so, for us, the victory of Ukraine in this war would not only mean that Ukrainians can stand up against Russian imperialism and have their own independence, but it would mean the subordination of the Russian minorities, including those in regions like Crimea, which are clearly Russian, majority Russian, and the Donbass, which at least there's a very strong proportion of the population there that wants to be with Russia. So for us, the national conflict in this situation can be resolved by the victory of the Ukrainians.
Yes. It's not the first time that we're discussing the issue, and
No,
it's not the last time. But like many national questions, they have to be viewed in their historic dynamic, from a historic point of view. The national question or maybe if you want to say the national questions in Ukraine did not start in 2014, but Russian oppression of Ukraine did already start 150 or more years ago, and throughout its history, the history of Tsarism, and then after the brief break with the young Soviet Union in times of Lenin and Trotsky, then Stalinism, there has been a very strong and brutal tradition of national oppression of the Ukrainian people by great Russian chauvinism. When the Ukraine became formally independent in 1991, this did not mean that with one stroke, so to say, it didn't escape the influence and the domination of Russia. I have to say that I myself became more aware of this. And through our comrades in Russia, who did point out to me which strong role not Russian corporations, but also Russian culture, the Russian state, did continue to play after Ukraine became formally independent. And you could see in 2014 when. Which already, of course, also the Americans did play a role, but also Russia did play a role. And in contrast to the America, Russia did even send armed forces into the Donbass region. So I mean, you cannot put. I think that the mistake you make is that you deal with this. You put these issues on the same level. The oppression, the national oppression of the Ukrainian people by the Russian imperialism or Russian chauvinism, on one hand, and issues of Russian minorities in the Ukraine. You put them on the same level. That's wrong because of the whole history, as I just explained, and also because this issue of of Russian or Russophile minorities in Crimea or in Donbass, which role they play in the concrete conflict today as proxies of Russian imperialism. So I think this is mistaken to put this on the same level.
I think I hear your point when you put this conflict in a broader context and point out to the historic nature of Russia's oppressive relationship towards Ukraine. And I think these are all legitimate points. I think obviously this is a very unequal relationship, and you can't just I can see your point in highlighting the dominant role of Russia. But for me, the key question is, how are we going to solve this problem? How are we going to solve this problem? And for us, the only way you can solve it is through democratic means, through the democratic, the respect of the democratic rights of both sides. And if you look at a place like Crimea, there's no doubt whatsoever that the democratic, expression of people's will in Crimea would not be to rejoin Ukraine. It's literally a Russian region. And to me, this question is quite central because I come from Quebec, and there obviously you can't put on the same plane the Quebec national question and the Anglophone national rights. There's a clear relationship of oppressor and oppressed here. That said, for Quebecois revolutionaries, it's really central to not draw as a conclusion from this that the Quebec national movement should adopt a policy of forcible assimilation of the historic Anglophone minorities in Quebec, which, by the way, are politically speaking extremely reactionary minorities. But the point and why it's so important not to adopt such a position, if you're a revolutionary in Quebec, is that you're surrounded by an Anglophone continent. So if you start oppressing national, Anglophones within your borders, at a Quebec independent state or something, then you break the link with the broader Anglophone population in the continent, which is really essential for any kind of revolution. I think that's a bit of the same thing in terms of Ukraine. If Ukrainians adopt a position of national oppression of their minorities and of Crimea, for example, it really locks them into this confrontational relationship with the whole Russian nation, and it's a confrontation which they can never win. So if they want to defend their own national existence, they need to defend the democratic rights of Russians and solve this question democratically.
Yes, look, you must differentiate two things in my opinion. Of course, we oppose, and our comrades in Ukraine oppose Ukrainian nationalism, and therefore we support the democratic rights of the Russian or Russophile minorities. This means there must be no oppression or discrimination of their language, being able to speak the language in schools, in public administration. There must be no discrimination of their culture, of their religious beliefs, etc., etc. And of course, the Zelensky government is advancing a policy towards discrimination. There's no doubt about it, and we oppose this. But what you confuse this, in my opinion, you confuse this with arguing that respecting the national rights of such minorities is necessarily be the same like supporting their right to join an imperialist state. If the Russians, you say, if the Russians in Crimea want to join Russia, we must be democratic and they must be able to join Russia. But I tell you, with the same logic, you could argue that we should not support the unification of Ireland because the pro-British sector of the population, the Protestants in Northern Ireland, they don't want to become part of Ireland. They are raising the Union Jack and they are defending the being part of the British Empire, or maybe the same can be said in Scotland. And yes, of course, they will not be happy if Scotland becomes independent, or if Northern Ireland becomes part of a 32 county republic. But nevertheless, the national right of the oppressed nation, Ireland or Ukraine, stands higher than such specific rights to join an imperialist state of this or that minority in Ukraine or in Ireland.
Yeah, I think this really touches the core of our difference. But just a point about Ireland, I think it's not a comparison that's applicable, because in Ireland you don't have two separate nations. They're not two different national groups that have different languages or honestly really culture. But you're talking about a politically loyalist, and of course it's overlaps with the religious question, sector of the Irish population. It's not the Protestants in Northern Ireland are not a separate national entity. Just as the people that refuse independence in Scotland or people that refuse independence in Quebec, they're not a distinct national grouping. They're simply, more like loyalist sectors of that population, which is very different from the case of Crimea, which is very clearly a different national entity than the rest of Ukraine. And I think, the position I believe you have, which is the, self-determination of Crimea, but once it is brought back under Ukrainian sovereignty, to me is just a position that is, really is a violation of actually the democratic rights of the population that lives there. And to us, it's not because a population is historically an oppressor nation that that its democratic rights are can be trampled on. Specifically because we really think that the only basis on which you really can unify the proletariat internationally is through the mutual respect of national rights.
Look, just briefly, I mean, that's not the main issue of our debate today. So but very briefly, look, yes, of course, we agree that there do not exist two nations in Northern Ireland, but it's clear that the Protestants have a specific identity. And of course, we would oppose any form of attack on Protestant churches or Protestant religious symbols, etc., etc. I'm sure we agree on this, but I just want to point out that we still can advance a policy for complete equality between nations, between religious groups, etc., etc. But this does not automatically mean that we support each and every political demand, like splitting from a specific state, joining another power. But this is not the main issue today. I just wanted to mention this.
Yeah, if I can just jump in, I've really enjoyed listening to the back and forth and its sort of organic development. I'm conscious we've been speaking now for almost an hour. I do want to bring it back to the broader general picture, which is the understanding of the international situation and the tasks for revolutionaries. Now, of course, I think there have been many differences, which we've touched on, but also some common ground. For example, the fight for political clarification to achieve more programmatic unity on the left, unless you guys want to go into another question, is, okay, we've had this back and forth. And as you said, Mikhail, at some point, these are not new questions. Our two organizations have been debating these things for some time now. And I guess for me, I would like to ask a more open-ended question about what does this mean for fighting to regroup the left in this increasingly turbulent period? There are real fundamental theoretical differences from which arise programmatic differences. And yes, debate and everything is necessary, but what are the political implications of these differences?
Yeah. Maybe just briefly on that. I think what our debate expresses is different trends of the Marxist movement today. And so I think that's why these debates, even if we are both very small organizations, I think these debates are important because they really reflect, different trends in the Marxist movement. But maybe we could touch a little bit on the question of China. Comrade Mikhail wanted to go on this, so I'll let you maybe respond to the question and introduce the discussion on China.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, that's. I was shocked when I heard that we discussed already for 1 hour, but you're right. But that's the dynamic of a good debate. And I definitely think it's important to discuss about this because I think, if you allow me to say this directly, I think one of the main weaknesses of the Spartacist analysis of China is that you have relatively little analysis of the Chinese economy. I don't say you have said nothing about it. That's not true, but very, very little. And we did try in a number of works to have a really concrete and detailed analysis of how how the Chinese economy is operating, about the law of value, also in the state enterprises, because the state enterprises are state capitalist enterprises. We have, and of course, one can disagree with this, but it would be necessary to disagree with concrete facts and counter arguments. And I think this is something which you should develop more in the future in order to substantiate your position, your analysis of China as a deformed worker state. Now you can say, of course, China is a deformed worker state because it's still the Communist Party which is in power, the Stalinist Party which is in power. That's true, but the point is which mode of production, which relation of property has this communist Stalinist party defended in the last 30 years. And if you analyze the economy concretely, you will see it has become a capitalist economy, and it has become a capitalist economy through a series of reforms which this Stalinist party has imposed in the last 3 decades. And therefore, it's clear that this regime is serving the capitalism and the Chinese bourgeoisie. So I think that's an important point. It concerning your question, which you just raised. Obviously, it's important to discuss these issues, but I think also that I believe in the coming years, in 20, 30 years, but in the coming years, we'll see a qualitative increasing number of conflicts, wars, crises between states, within states, and it is the task of revolutionaries to take a position in such conflicts, and also to test their program, to test their analysis in face of such concrete conflicts. I think it's necessary to collaborate on issues where there is agreement: the pro-Palestine movement, defense against repression, opposition resistance against U.S. attacks against Iran, for example. These are things where I think it's necessary to collaborate. Then, of course, we also have to see in both all socialists, all Marxists must test their analysis in face of the concrete developments in China, for example, and then one has to see which analysis is correct. In my point of view, in our point of view, one can see that China has the Chinese corporations have playing a leading role in the world. China plays a crucial role. China's relation to other countries takes the form of a dominant character. But this is something which has to be tested, not only in discussions, but also in practice.
Yeah, I can only agree with the last part of, not every word of the last part of your intervention, but certainly where the part where you talk about the importance of testing our ideas in practice. And, being in an organization that itself has had to change a lot of its views on a whole series of questions precisely through practice, we're very aware of this. And I think that's one reason also why it's important to have these debates, so that we can kind of go through these experiences and kind of test our respective views of the world. Now, if I can move over to the question of China, I think we certainly could do more work on the empirical analysis of the Chinese economy. I don't have a difference on this, but I think that's not the key substance of our difference. And I think what shows this the most clearly is how we relate to other similar kinds of states, what we would call other deformed worker states. For example, the RCIT thinks that Cuba, North Korea, Vietnam are also all capitalist states, if I understand you correctly. And of course, if you look at Cuba and North Korea, they're totally different economically from China in terms of the size of companies, the private nature of the functioning of the economy, and so on. They're very, very different beasts. So I say this not to have a debate on Cuba or North Korea, but just to highlight that for us the difference is really one of method more than kind of argument about the empirical facts, which I think if we look at the facts, I think most of them we won't particularly disagree about. That's why that's not so much what we highlight in our articles, is not so much the facts as the method and the approach. For us, the key thing is really to look at the concrete development of a state. And we look at it, we see the state as really, as Lenin defines it, armed bodies of men that defend through force a certain form of property, a certain dictatorship of a class, and we also think that the state represents a fundamental antagonism between classes. That's the very essence of a state. And so for that reason, we think that you can't simply have the transition of one state to another state that just kind of seamlessly transition from one phase to another. Like it would, we of course all agree that it's impossible to go from a capitalist state gradually into a social, worker state. And we think that the reverse is true. That we think also that historical experience has shown that the collapse of a worker state, a counter-revolution, is a very violent process. If you look at the Soviet Union and all of Eastern Europe, what happened, you really have very clear examples of the collapse of a certain state. This did not happen through civil war, as Trotsky predicted, but they were nonetheless real kind of social collapses of a really very dramatic nature. Whereas what you see in China is a very different process, where actually the regime, the dictatorship of the proletariat, which was won through the Chinese Revolution, maintained itself in power. It did not collapse actually, and it had actually a totally different process than what happened in Eastern Europe. So I think that's the kind of, for us, that's the key methodological difference in terms of our approach. I'll leave it at this.
Yes. No, I certainly do not disagree that this is an issue of method. But I think if you look at the process of capitalist restoration in after 1989 or 91, yes, you had various countries where this did take a violent form or a form of collapse. But you had other countries where this was not the case. I mean, there were several countries in Central Asia, or take Belarus. You have in the Caucasus, Azerbaijan, you have the same party, the same people, the same leaders, which were in power already before the collapse of the Soviet Union, who did remain in power. And in some cases, in Azerbaijan, for example, it's still the same family. Now it's the son of the dictator who implemented capitalist restoration. It's the same regime. You have a continuity of the regime, not only in Vietnam or China, etc., but also in this in various countries in Central Asia or in Caucasus or Belarus. Yes, they did change the name of the party, but that was all in terms concerning their political superstructure. So and the argument that if it's the same party, the same regime which stays in power, then therefore there can be no capitalist restoration because it's not a civil war or collapse or something like this. I think this is theoretically and empirically not correct. By the way, one also should not ignore or not ignore, but underestimate the process which did take place in China. I mean, first, don't forget we had the massacre on the Tiananmen Square in '89, which killed, slaughtered thousands of workers and students which were protesting against the regime. And then the process of capitalist restoration did result in I think if I remember correctly, 26 million workers in the state industry were sacked, became unemployed. What is true is that because the process of market reforms did already start after '78, there has been a long process of growth of private capital, which this process accelerated in the 1990s, and this already existing and expanding capitalist sector of the economy was able to absorb a number of these workers which were sacked, kicked out by the state enterprises.
Okay, there are lots of points again. First of all, on the question of you mentioned Belarus and states in the Caucasus. Just I'm far from an expert about all these countries, but one thing to me that jumps out as an obvious point is that all of those states were part of the Soviet Union. And they then broke off from the Soviet Union and became independent states. Before they were all under the common state with the Russians and under the same state structure, the Red Army and so on. And then they broke off into independent, capitalist republics. So I think that this is a totally different. To me, that doesn't contradict at all. The argument I'm making. I would like to address maybe the main argument that we hear against our view is that is like the pointing to the existence of capitalist relations within China, including of course all the billionaires that exist in China. Obviously, we're not blind to this fact, and we take it into account. But it's just for us the presence of capitalist social relations, even to quite an extreme degree, as is the case in China, is not sufficient to prove that the state itself is a capitalist. And I think if you look at the Soviet example, it's not from day one of the revolution that you had a fully socialized economy. And even under Lenin there was the NEP, and you still had a very, very large capitalist sector that continued to exist for quite a while in terms of the Soviet Union. So the existence of capitalist forms doesn't on its own prove that the economy is under the political and control of the capitalist class. Now, of course, I'm sure you'll make the point that in China we do have a very extreme version of this, but at the very least. But I think no matter on which side we're on in this debate, I think what's happened in China is a very, very extreme, exceptional historical process that I think does not easily fit in any kind of pre-established theoretical framework. And I think for us, one of the main questions we raise is, if China did indeed develop on a fully capitalist basis at the epoch of imperialism, how is it that it was able to have such a phenomenal growth, which was really somewhat unprecedented in all of world history? That whole development really contradicts for us the idea that this would have happened on a purely capitalist basis. Finally, just on Tiananmen, I think you're of course right in terms of pointing out to the brutal repression of the Stalinists there. But exactly for us, this example really shows the opposite of what happened in Eastern Europe. You have a consolidation of the power of the Communist Party of China, who then after liberalized its economy with the very clear and conscious goal to maintain its overall system. Deng Xiaoping never said we're bringing capitalism back to China. It was always to maintain the hold of the Communist Party of China and to keep building what they call in China, socialism with Chinese characteristics.
Yes. Look, if you look at the development, the historical development in the early Soviet Union, between the moment when the Bolsheviks did take power and the time when they nationalized the key sectors of the banks and the industry, it was only a few months' time in between. I mean, we're not talking about a historic period, so to say. But in China, you have a process of more than 3 decades, where the regime has you did say before in not now but a few minutes ago, you did say the question is which property relations does the regime defend, and that's a question I think one has to answer concretely. Which property relations does the Stalinist regime in China defend? And if you look back at the last 3 decades, you can see it is the capitalist property relations, because the capitalist property relations have enormously expanded. They've created one of the largest capitalist class in the world. So it's clear that they have served these capitalist property relations, and they have not defended any remaining proletarian property relations. So I think how can you argue, or how can you show that the Stalinist regime did defend the planned proletarian property relations in China? Where are they doing this?
Yeah, I think you're asking the right questions, but what we would answer to this is that through its political control of the whole economy and the gigantic state sector, the total control of the banking sector and the main strategic industries, the Chinese economy doesn't function on a purely capitalist basis. It is under centralized state control in a form that isn't true at all in any other states. Now, of course, there's market mechanisms, but those market mechanisms are all subordinate to the political interest of the Stalinist ruling strata.
But look, if you, I mean, the Chinese corporations, including the state corporations, are making their profit. The rate of profit is higher than the rate of profit of European corporations or Japanese corporations. It's a bit lower than those of British and American corporations, but they have a high profit rate. I know, of course, that the number of central or key large industrial and enterprises and banks are still in hand of the state, but they are like other state capitalist industries, which also existed, by the way, of course, in Europe, not now so much, but after the Second World War, for decades. They are working for profit, and they are making a lot of profit. And do not forget, comrade, that, and we did show this in a study which we published 2 years ago. If the bureaucracy of the state and party bureaucracy is closely interlinked with the capitalists, or nearly all families from which were the leaders of the Stalinist party in the 1980s and 1990s, all these families have become capitalists. I mean, these are clans. Not every single person is a capitalist, but one is a party bureaucrat. The sister is a big enterprise. The third one is a big state manager, etc., etc. And you have this system of combination of bureaucracy and enterprises, capital business. You have not only on the highest state level, but also on a regional level, on a local level, with smaller enterprises, etc., etc. So these are not entgegengesetzte antagonist social forces, the bureaucracy and capitalists, but they are strongly related with each other. This does not exclude, of course, that there are conflicts between them and within these social forces. But again, this is not, China is not an exception on this, as we did argue in a reply to what you wrote on this. I mean, also in Russia, I mean, Putin also disciplines some oligarchs who are falling out of line, and Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia does the same, etc., etc. These are, of course, an authoritarian border, but these regimes have to discipline sectors of the bourgeoisie. This does not mean that they are therefore not capitalist, such regimes.
Okay. Yeah. On the question of Bonapartism, we responded to this point in our theoretical article on this question. I won't go so much into this question here. And I don't disagree with most of the facts you laid out. They are facts, and it's true that part of the the Communist Party of China is interlinked with capitalist class interest. That's very clear. But for us, there remains a fundamental inner contradiction within the Communist Party of China of, if you want, split allegiances. This balancing act of a bureaucracy that Trotsky characterizes. Although I have to concede that obviously there are very important differences in these two examples. But for us, the decisive test will be shown in actual fact. How does China as a social organism evolve? But if I can just bring it more down a bit more concretely in terms of the tasks, and then maybe we can slowly wrap this point up. In terms of the tasks for us, in terms of the specific dynamics of the revolution in China and in approaching the Chinese proletariat, for us it's important, to associate ourselves with the most left-wing sentiments within the Chinese working class, who see who sees still a gain from the Chinese Revolution, who sees the development that happened in China as a product of the Chinese Revolution. And they see the bureaucrats and capitalists as traitors to the Chinese Revolution, who are undermining their stated principles of socialism and communism. So for us, that contradiction is one of the fundamental dynamics that we have to understand and intervene into in order to develop a revolutionary current within China. And if you simply say, that China is capitalist, that it's, the same basically as the United States, you're shutting yourself to this contradiction that I think is really essential for any kind of revolutionary struggle in China to advance in a progressive direction, and not to a just anti-communist kind of counter-revolutionary direction, as happened in the whole of Eastern Europe.
I think to just briefly on this last point, I am aware that there exist sectors within the intelligentsia in China who are praising the Maoist past and who want to, I hope this is good English, but who want to pull China back to the good old times, the road of Maoism. And I certainly would say that, of course, if you have some young, enthusiastic people who fight against the ruling elite under the banner of Maoism, of course, this is a healthy reaction. But it is a serious mistake to believe that any sector of the bureaucracy, any sector of the Communist Party, of the ruling elite, is capable or even willing to pull back China to become a worker state, to expropriate the bourgeoisie. This is impossible. Why is it impossible? Because, as I said before, the bureaucracy is closely interlinked. They would hurt their own interest if they would move forward to expropriate the bourgeoisie. They would have, to speak in a form of a picture, they would have to expropriate their brother, their sister, their nephew, etc., etc. And that's not what they are going to do. But they will, of course, there will be. I cannot predict the future. But I have no doubt, of course, that in every ruling class, think about the deep divisions within the American ruling class, there will also be China has less reason to, at the moment, to have deep conflicts or faction struggles because it is a more successful model. But I think it's a mistake to believe that one of sectors of the ruling class would be able to take a policy of, even as Stalinist, reformist, anti-capitalist policy. And just one last sentence, but what you did say before, that China's growth is unprecedented, and how can we explain this? You say, and no, that's not true. Of course, capitalism as a historic system, as a global system, is in decline. This does not mean that every capitalist country in a whole epoch of imperialism is always declining. And we have seen in the last, for example, Japan in the 50s, 60s, 70s, till the 80s, South Korea in the same period. They also have seen decades of rapid growth. So rapid growth of China is not at all an argument against the analysis of being that has become capitalist.
Just briefly on the first point, I think time will tell, and the development of class struggle will tell if it is possible or not to have a fracture within the bureaucracy in China. I think that will be one of the important tests in the future. I think how Hungary, for example, reacted to popular uprisings in the 1950s was a kind of a clear test in terms of to prove the character of the Hungarian worker state. So we will see how future developments occur with China. On the question of Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and they're comparing their development to China, I think that's maybe a bit of a rabbit hole. But I do think that the development there is fundamentally different from that happened in China. I think first of all the question of scale is uncomparable, and then briefly those states were really built up as really by the Americans as anti-communist bastions, and you saw a certain transfer of technology and so on from the United States to consciously build up these states against China. But the development that happened there is, in terms of scale, totally incomparable to the development that happened in China. But I think this is a bit of a whole other debate that I'm sure we could.
I agree.
Get into some kind of.
Okay. So, is there other questions that you guys want to touch on, or can I start bringing this to a close?
I think
yes.
Yeah,
we could wrap it up.
Well, look, for me, it was a very rich discussion, very high level, comradely, and I think the thing that stands out to me, obviously, I'm a partisan in this debate, but I think I do have to say the RCIT's worldview, there's a coherence to it. I think, Mikhail, you've for every argument that Perrault raised, you had a very coherent answer to, which I think is quite impressive. But I think if I was able to sum up some of the if I was able to sum up some of the key questions which this debate reflected in terms of the differences, which are reflected more broadly in the Marxist left, imperialism, what is it? What is the definition of imperialism? How do we understand it? I think that's a key question. And I think both of you challenged each other on the definitions, how narrow, what's the essence of it, etc. We've, of course, talked about China, whether or not it's imperialist and its class character as well. And, point taken that, of course, we can do more work on the empirical side of the question. But then there is the more, I think, the question of the state, when did the counter-revolution occur, etc. Those were raised, as well as the national question and national oppression, specifically in the context of Ukraine and Russia, where I think for all revolutionaries, the question has to be, what is a road to achieving a progressive outcome in the current war? So, in all those questions, I appreciate the back and forth. I learned a lot, definitely, and I encourage our listeners to comment on this debate, to engage with it, because this really is, these are some of the key lines on the international left, and I think further discussion and clarity on these is much needed. I will ask whether either one of you wants to close this discussion with any concluding comments, and then we'll leave it there.
No, thank you again for Mikhail to participate in this debate. I thought it was quite useful and clarifying, I hope, for our listeners.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. And I also think that such kind of debates are very useful and productive. And thanks a lot for inviting me.
Okay, lovely. Well, on that note, thank you, comrades. And we will see you guys hopefully soon next time. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye, comrades. Bye.
Bye.
Well, I ain't got no smoke, at least not with you. And I don't know if you don't know, but there are just a few of oligarchs boxing capitalist, profiting massive profits, holding us down in lockstep, and your vote, it ain't gonna stop.